thank Chairman Shin, Professor Shin, for your kind introduction. Whenever I come to this kind of conference, I feel guilty for the state of affairs, since I have served for more than 2 years as head of delegation to the six-party nuclear negotiations, and I'm partly responsible for the big mess that we are in now. But one consolation I have is that because of the failure in diplomacy, nuclear academic industry is still thriving. So that's one consolation I can share with my fellow negotiators. I think I'll have to pick up from where we left off in the previous session. I don't know how I should be much different from the previous session. I will begin with what we may have achieved in the Singapore summit, and then to the main issues. I think Singapore summit produced some controversial outcome, but in my view, it's nothing but an agreement to begin a process of negotiations, and on agenda items, and on the order of agenda items also. Normalization of US-DPRK relations, peace regime, security guarantees, nuclear democratization. These are the agenda items that the Singapore summit agreed. But it is meaningful in that it gives one last chance for diplomatic resolution of the North Korean nuclear issue. And the question now is how to make the best use of the window of opportunity while it remains open. I don't think it will remain open indefinitely. And there has been controversy on why the operational definition of complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is missing. I don't think this is an issue about semantics. And I understand the reason why North Korea has resisted so ferociously to the use of CVID. Because if you look at the Security Council resolutions, CVID is applicable only to North Korea. When North Korea wants is not only CVID of North Korea, but denuclearization of the entire Korean Peninsula. What that means is, if we put the best face on North Korea's use of terminology, it's CVID plus the end of US extended nuclear deterrence and foregoing of any future deployment of US nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula or in its neighborhood. That's, I think, the definition that North Korea has about denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. So it is far bigger, far broader concept, but I don't want to rule out the possibility of CVID in the broader concept. And it depends on how the US negotiates with North Korea in the future. I think that the real problem with the Singapore summit is the order of agenda items that was spelled out in the joint statement, and I will come back to it later on. When it comes to the substance of denuclearization, North Korea has in mind we have two testing grounds down the road. One is the negotiation for a roadmap, which links and sequences progress in denuclearization with the delivery of US commitments. And this roadmap is to specify the stage where North Korea will remove the last kilogram or last gram of fissile material plutonium, and HEU, and dismantle or permanently disable the related facilities, such as enrichment plants, reprocessing facilities, and the 5 megawatt reactor. Another testing ground is verification. Because I think in the CVID, what really matters is verifiable, because the degree of verifiability is the determinant of irreversibility and completeness. So the only way whether North Korea will be completely and irreversibly denuclearized is how far we can verify its denuclearization. Whether North Korea allows unrestricted and unconditional access to all relevant facilities, locations, information, and that will determine the quantity of warheads or fissile material North Korea can conceal after so-called complete denuclearization. And that's the time it takes to rebuild the nuclear arsenal. Once it breaks out of the deal, the lessons from Singapore to me is how easily an impulsive president of the most powerful country in the world, equipped with the strongest negotiating leverage, can be outmaneuvered and played by a shrewd strategist of a state languishing in abject poverty. But I think it's better to learn the lessons earlier than later. So, but why is there deadlock now? Why after Singapore summit we are not moving forward at all? I think from my own experience and from previous negotiations, we always had a disagreement on what is agreed. Whenever you reach an agreement with North Korea, the next day, if you ask North Korea and other parties, US, they, in my recollection, they always have different interpretations. Sometimes it's more difficult to agree on same interpretation of the agreement than reaching agreement. So the way North Korea interprets Singapore's joint statement is that it's in the order, in the sequence of agenda items specified in the joint statement. So it begins with new relations, new US bipartite relations, peace regime, security guarantees, and denuclearization comes at the last. What that means for North Korea is that we will denuclearize, whatever that means, once we have pocketed all these things that will assure us that we can live without nuclear weapons, that we will be safe, we will be secure, and there will be no problem living without nuclear weapons. So this is order. And when Pompeo goes to Pyongyang, you should denuclearize, then no. It's predictable that, well, North Korea used some harsh words. And actually, the Korean word they used was rubber. But I think in English version it was toned down. But anyway, when Pompeo demands denuclearization, North Korea, describes as a rubber-like attitude, because that's not their understanding. You have to normalize relations and give us security assurance, peace regime, all those things. Then we will see if we can move forward for denuclearization. What's Kim Jong-un's strategy and game plan? Regardless of all these struggle to shape the negotiations to either side advantage. I would still give the benefit of doubt to Kim Jong-un's commitment. And because pessimism is so dominant, I feel compelled to strike the balance by, giving a little dose of optimism. I think there are three reasons why we can be cautiously optimistic about Kim Jong-un's commitment. Why would he be interested in democratization? First, I think he's playing a long-term game. If his goal is to be around for 5 years, 10 years, I think his policy should be to stick to nuclear weapons, whatever happens, under any circumstances. But I think his plan is to be around for 40 years or 50 years until his biological life ends. And if that's the time frame he has in mind, nuclear weapons alone, even if he has hundreds of ICBMs, they cannot protect him. They cannot assure him to leave a more secure, more prosperous country to his son or daughter. So I would believe that if he's going to be around for that long, he needs economic development. And that's what Byungjin is all about. Now that he achieved nuclear goal, he wants to move to his economic goal, and he knows that his economic goal cannot be achieved without a deal on the nuclear front. Another motive for democratization at this stage is the fundamental change in the cost structure of nuclear armament, brought about by the completion of what Kim Jong-un described as the completion of the national nuclear force. He declared that on December 12th last year. So December 12th is real turning point in North Korea's strategy. So what that means is that he now knows how easy it is to rebuild nuclear arsenal within a year at most, or even if he accepts a full democratization. So it costs far less to rebuild nuclear arsenal once North Korea is prosperous, once North Korean economy is 10 times bigger than now, for instance, 10 years, 20 years from now, than languishing under crushing sanctions and mounting danger of military strikes in order to retain the nuclear arsenal. So nuclear latency coupled with a credible security assurance, economic development can be a substitute for an operational nuclear arsenal which denies the chance of an economic turnaround and breaking out of international isolation and to join the international community as a normal state. The third factor is North Korea's confidence in fooling the inspectors and concealing enough undeclared fissile material in the course of verification. Only if North Korea can hide a significant amount of fissile material through false declaration or able to operate one of the clandestine enrichment plants without being detected, then he can reduce the time required to rebuild nuclear arsenal from, for instance, a year to a matter of 1 or 2 months. So what he needs is not to get into military conflict with the US by refraining from new tests when he has to rebuild nuclear arsenal. So I think Kim Jong-un will fulfill his denuclearization commitment to the extent that he desires all these benefits, like sanctions relief, peace regime, security assurances, normal relations with the U.S. So I wouldn't rule out the possibility. Nobody can guarantee that North Korea will denuclearize, but I wouldn't rule out completely the possibility that, depending on how U.S. deals with North Korea in the future, in the roadmap negotiations, on the verification, I think there still remains a hope. But he will play games to hold as much nuclear capability as possible for as long as possible. There's no doubt about it. He will move enough only to keep the ball rolling and to keep the U.S. from returning to maximum pressure. And he will abandon them only when he has no other option. I have no illusion about that. And he will, as he is doing, he will try to front load what he values most in U.S. hands, among those assets that are held in the U.S. hands, while trying to withhold those assets in his hands that the U.S. values most until the last. And he's trying to capitalize on those assets no longer needed, like nuclear test sites or missile engine test sites, and that can be easily rebuilt with a minimal cost and in short time, while trying to trivialize and downplay more valuable assets in U.S. hands, such as joint military exercises. So what North Korea claims now is that we have done such great things as shutting down nuclear test sites that he himself admitted in his report to the April 20th Central Party plenum that these facilities are no longer necessary because we have a completed national nuclear force. These facilities are no longer, they are useless now. So he is trading these useless facilities with joint military exercises, and he's not happy. So the suspension of joint military exercises is nothing. All the troops are there, and you stop one move. How can it be compared to the great things that we have done in shutting down the nuclear test site and things like that? So he demands more. What he demands now is the end of war declaration. So this is the game he's playing now. And he will try to earn as much time as possible over non-essential issues. Like, as I said, end of war declaration. In order to avoid to getting into real issues. So he tries to avoid real issues, denuclearization, declaration, freeze. He tries to put them off as long as possible while trying to, focus U.S. on trivial issues. That's part of North Korea's traditional, negotiating tactics. So there's no surprise about that. But I think the bigger problem than denuclearization, in my view, is the price to pay. Well, we should worry about whether we should trust North Korea's commitment to denuclearization. But even if it is trustworthy, a bigger problem is the price. What's the price tag? Well, as I said, sanctions relief, peace regime, all those things, massive economic assistance, withdrawal of U.S. troops, no military drills, no more nuclear umbrella, no deployment of tactical nuclear weapons. So in sum, what they want is recognition for the legitimacy of Kim Jong-un regime and resolution of all North Korea's existential problems. and weakening of US-ROK alliance. And this only for North Korea's retreat from Operation Nuclear Arsenal to at most 1 year, and as short as 1 or 2 months. And the real questions I ask myself sometimes is such denuclearization really worth the price to pay? The virtual dismantlement of US-ROK alliance. But which is better for the ROK? A denuclearized North Korea without US troops, or nuclear-armed North Korea with US troops and the alliance intact? Can it be an alternative to rely on the strategy of deterrence and containment, living with a nuclear-armed North Korea while, trying to foment a regime change in North Korea in the meantime? So these are, I think, real questions that we'll have to ask ourselves, depending on the quality of denuclearization that North Korea is ready to do. Now so I have spent too much time, but give me just a few more minutes. What would be the impact of denuclearization on the US-ROK alliance and ROK security? I think this is the issue that I was asked to mention. I think ROK-US alliance will be the main casualty of denuclearization. The alliance is already facing an unprecedented crisis. Respective positions of South and North Korea, US and China have never been closer on alliance-related issues. For the first time in 65 years, after the Korean War, ROK and US are on the same page in regarding joint military exercises and troops as dispensable and negotiable. The alliance is devalued and hollowed out. And reduced US military presence on the Korean Peninsula will certainly translate into diminished US influence and credibility in this region. An illusion of peace to be generated by a peace regime, and denuclearization will further erode the rationale for the troop presence and raise a question about need for the alliance. But how will conventional military balance fare after denuclearization? Professor Chun was very worried about North Korean conventional threat after denuclearization. I'm not that much worried about that. I think once North Korean nuclear capabilities are eliminated, North Korean conventional threats are manageable. Long-range artillery threats have for long been grossly exaggerated. Out of 14,100 artillery pieces deployed north of DMZ, there are only 340 pieces that can send their shells to Seoul. Only about 2%, a little more than 2% of North Korean artillery can reach Seoul. And most of them are in fixed locations, underground facilities. They can be destroyed before North Korea can actually do much harm to it. Before North Korea, if we have the right intelligence, vigilant monitoring, most North Korean long-range artillery can be destroyed before they send a single shell. And they have to reload. They have to go back to their tunnels to reload. They have no ammunition storage outside their underground facilities. Very vulnerable. I think the most vulnerable artillery I know of are North Korean long-range artillery, in fact. But the military, they always wish to exaggerate North Korean threats. That helps in increasing defense budget, I know, but they have, I think that works against them now. Anyway, I think the conventional military threats are not as much worrisome as Professor Chun is worried about. But the new challenges will come from the new peacetime maritime order to be applicable by a peace treaty. Because once a peace treaty is concluded, then the legal system around the Korean Peninsula will be into a peacetime legal system. So North Korea could demand to redraw the inter-Korean maritime border and apply the rules of 12 nautical miles, territorial waters, and median line in accordance with the convention of the law of the sea. If North Korea insists that international law should be applicable in drawing maritime border between South and North, NLL will disappear, and they can extend, exclusive economic zone from that 12-mile nautical mile territorial waters, 188 miles to the south. So the planes that land in Incheon Airport will have to pass through North Korean exclusive economic zone. If North Korea declares that all those planes should receive license from North Korea, I don't think that will. I don't think about that. But this peace regime, peace sounds very good. But what happens after peace regime will fundamentally restructure the security situation, especially the maritime security. And North Korean ships, even warships, can navigate in the area of operation controlled by the ROK Navy. They have a freedom of navigation. They have a right to innocent passage between the channels between Jeju Island and the mainland, between in the Tsushima Straits. So I don't know what our generals are thinking about these threats.
Time is almost up.
So I have to conclude, right? I'll have to skip many of the. I think impact on Northeast Asian security. There are many moving parts that which together shape the big geostrategic landscape of East Asia. Denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and its consequences will not be a decisive factor, but a significant one in the great game being played out in Northeast Asia. Good news is that it will eliminate one of the most intractable, dangerous sources of confrontation and military conflict at the epicenter of geopolitical tectonic plates, fraught with the return of great power politics. And denuclearization would be a stabilizer in a region bedeviled with growing instability, volatility, and anxiety. But in terms of broader US-China strategic competition, I think China will be the winner. China's position will be strengthened by a stable, economically vibrant North Korea with nuclear latency, sharing almost a 1,400-kilometer long border, and which depends on China for both security and economic prosperity. Reduced US military presence and activities to be occasioned by the withdrawal of US troops and THAAD missile defense systems from the ROK could lead to weakening of US security commitment and political influence in Northeast Asia. However, if the cost savings from the withdrawal of US ground troops are diverted into reinforcing US naval balance, US naval and air power in the region, I think the damage can be somewhat limited. Another factor I would like to mention as the last point is that denuclearization could enhance and peace regime that could enhance China's position